There we go. All right, what's up, Jamie? We're Jamie Barbour today, a fellow mystery school guide, and the focus of this episode is that you have to be in the world to actually affect change, right? And a lot of people today, as the world gets crazier and crazier, they think, hey, screw it, I'm just going to run away and live off grid or not have to deal with people, and I don't want to deal with work and business and relationships and all this stuff. They're kind of over it, right? But what we were saying pre-call was, you don't really have any power to actually put the boots on the ground, actually learn how to affect change, and start moving that direction. So, to get everybody started, could you explain sort of what life was like before you found the spiritual path, and really what led you there?
So I grew up in Alabama, which most people know is kind of the Bible Belt. Most of the foundation and understanding is Christian based. Even if you're not a church going Christian or you party, you still have your little Christian card of like, yeah, I believe in Jesus, and go back about your life. Right? And so it wasn't until I was probably like 12, 13 years old. My mom had she claims a near death experience, which pushed her to want to go to church the very next day and got saved. And so all of a sudden, my family became church going people. Did all the church things, all the retreats, all the Bible camps, and blah, blah. And at that age, it's more of like, hey, I can go see my friends at church and I can hang out. And it's more of a social scene, right? But after a couple bad breakups in relationships and whatever else, I kind of pulled myself out of like the youth group of the church I was at. And when I did that, I kind of got left with like, okay, well, what is this religion really about? And so I got to sit in the pews and just kind of observe and listen for the first time. And as I did so, something just didn't feel right. Something seemed off. Couldn't put my finger on it, couldn't explain it to you, but it was enough to make me start questioning things. And of course, at first, this was very unacceptable to my family. Immediately, I was a devil worshiper, was rebuked in the name of Jesus, the whole nine. And in that time, I got very confused because I wanted to do what was right. And what I was told in my programming was is that this is what's right, but it doesn't feel right. And so I got kind of torn. And so I used to pray sometimes in tears, God, I just want to know what the truth is. I don't care what the truth is. I don't know how to function in my life without understanding what the truth is. And right around that time, I met a guy who was into, quote, magic. He declared himself a witch. He was a little weird. He also said he was a vampire. But something about his talk about magic shut off a light bulb with me. So I decided to go explore it on my own. So I went into a local bookstore and I found a book called Magic for Beginners by J.H. Brennan. And I started digging into this book, got a couple chapters in, got bored with it because he just kept telling stories about experiments him and his buddies would do with like divination tools like Ouija boards and whatever else. I'm like, this isn't what I want to know. So I dropped the book, went looking for another book, and found another one called Ancient Teachings for Beginners. And this one was cool. It gave me a good kind of like introduction to many world religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, but it was the first piece that started to talk about the ancient mystery schools. And I was like, when I first read it, I was under the impression because they were ancient that they didn't exist anymore. I was like, man, that would have been so cool to live thousands of years ago and be able to be a part of one of these like spiritual schools. And so I continued on my life following these little breadcrumbs, trying to gather truth and knowledge. And in that, I started exploring drugs. That's, most people, especially kids, that's something that gives them an experience outside of the normal state of consciousness. So it's like,
Yeah, you
oh,
want to
yeah, this is something different.
kind
Let's
of
go
break the
check this
box
out.
and
Right.
break the box and feel something.
Right. So I dove into that and got into like the rave culture. And to me, that was kind of like, oh, that was what we talk about now. We talk about this thing, Shambhala, right? For me, like the earlier days of raves, like that's to me, that's what it was. It was like everyone's on this ecstasy and everybody loves everybody, cuddle puddles, the whole night. And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this is what life is about. And then I started noticing, even in those circles, there was this image, but behind the curtains, people were doing shady things. They were hurting one another in various forms. And I was like, man, this isn't what I thought it was. But in all of that, I had a very unique experience on a Mother's Day, actually. And on this, I'll shorten this story because there's a lot of details to it. But in this particular acid trip, there was a certain concern Some might even say it's the first bad trip I've ever had, to where I actually started like getting into my emotions during this trip. But in this, there was an establishment of a voice that I started to hear in my head. And as weird as that might sound, but I literally heard this voice in my head start talking to me about the things I was concerned about. It took me a couple days to realize, even after the trip, that there was a voice like someone else talking to me in my head. And one of the first things it told me is to quit doing drugs. And I was like, no, never.
The
That is
drugs
what
told you
is,
not to do drugs.
well, it was, that's the thing. It's like, you know, it wasn't, it wasn't actually that. It was like something higher was calling me out. And so the immediate thing it told me to do was quit doing drugs. And I says, no, this is what's giving me access to the spiritual experience. And it says, no, you can do it without it. And I ignored it. And so within 2 weeks of ignoring it, no matter how much acid I would eat, I would not get high. I would not trip. And it kind of got frustrating. So I hit up my buddy who was a dealer. And so I got a sheet off of him to start selling so that I could support trying to eat larger quantities to see what it was going to take for me to actually get there. And 2 weeks after selling it, I got busted 30 hits of LSD. I went to jail and I laid down on the cot. Oh my God, why did this happen to me? And the voice came in. It says, I told you time and time again to stop. You will learn on this journey if I don't get your attention one way, I will get it another. I said, okay. And that was the day I quit doing hallucinogenics. So I got out of jail. I had a friend's mom bail me out, paid her back. Actually got out of the charge fairly easily because on 2 occasions the police officer did not show up to court. The arresting officer didn't show up. So the DA gave me the option to settle with a plea bargain, and so I could roll the dice and get it dismissed altogether, or just take the plea bargain. So I took the plea bargain. But most of my friends at that point thought that, okay, well, you must be a snitch. You must have told on somebody. So none of my friends would talk to me. Part of that agreement was I had to go through treatment, and so at that point I had no friends and I couldn't get high. So I got stuck sitting on my couch trying to figure out, well, now what am I going to do with my life? And that voice came in and told me to go to massage therapy school. And I was like, well, that makes sense. I used to massage people at raves. It seems pretty good. And so that was like the vision. And in that vision, I kind of saw myself as this like healer, spiritual healer and teacher. And I was like, okay, that's cool. How do you get there? Massage therapy school makes sense. Started pursuing massage school. No one in Alabama is teaching because of some change in curriculum requirements by the board. But one of the owners tells me, if you have a chance, go to Washington. They have the best massage schools. What she didn't know is that my biological father lives in Washington, and I never really knew him growing up. So I always wanted to meet him. So I was like, well, that's the plan. I'll go to Washington, meet my biological father, and go to massage therapy school, which is what I did. And when I went to massage therapy school, the owner invited me to their wedding because she was engaged at the time. And it was through that wedding, ironically, that I was first exposed to the mystery school. It was actually a mystery school wedding. The person who officiated it was an initiate. And that was the first time I really got to feel the energy of this work. And it was the most real, most tangible thing to me. It blew my mind. I'm sitting in the back of the wedding like, does anyone else feel this? Like, it was really, really, really wild.
All without drugs.
Right. And so it was kind of like, huh, okay, there's something to this. I want to know what this is. How can I get my hands on this? And so that's kind of like what brought me to the school in general and where I was kind of coming from. I just want to know what the truth was. And I didn't really care about anything physical. I didn't care about society. I didn't care about a job, a career. I didn't care about anything other than finding out what the truth of life was. What is the
Well, it's
purpose? Why are we here?
it's funny, right? Because we're always looking for. I mean, that was my experience too. I was since I was little. It was like, why are we here, right? None of this makes sense. I was raised religious, and I did all similar things to you to try to we're trying to get those answers, right? So we think, oh, maybe if I go to church, I'll get that feeling, that connection. Maybe if I do the drugs, I'll get that feeling connection. And then it's all sort of temporary and it doesn't really last, right? There's no direct connection through that. So it's funny how you say, yeah, I did church, I did the drugs, really trying to do the drugs, trying to do, what'd you say, almost a whole sheet just to feel something, get that connection, to answer that question that you're yearning for. And it wasn't until, yeah, she came into that direct experience where you actually feel it and say, oh, this is it. This is different, right? What is this now? And can I, that was without church without drugs, nothing, right?
What's interesting to me too is that it all seems, I think I found something. There's something here. And you get into it and it has this kind of mirage of like, I think I found something. And then the
Hmm.
deeper you get into it, you start to see the reality of it. You start to see like, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought it was. Oh, this isn't as clean or as legit as I thought it was.
Yeah.
It's always like there's this mask that covers it. It's like, hey, this is it. This is what you're looking for. And then you get into it and you're like, there's an illusion here.
Yeah. That's sort of like the levels of, before we can be initiated, we go through levels of self initiation, right? And that's where most people are before they're ready to really take on a true spiritual path is they're trying, and they're kind of working their way through chaos a bit, right? And the intention is good. They want to, that's what their desire is to find out the truth, to know themselves, to progress, right? But it's like what you just said. It's like, oh, I think this is going to be the next thing and the next thing. And we go around having kind of, there was a book, there was a retreat, there was this, there was church, there was raves, right? And they all kind of feel good. But then there's the sort of behind the scenes of like, this isn't really fulfilling me as much as I thought. It wasn't truly getting me that direct connection I'm looking for. So what about, so you were saying at the ceremony you felt that, which is big because we don't really, what was, I was teaching somebody something the other day and they said, you're telling me all these things, but until I felt it, I didn't actually know. And once I felt it, it's when it clicked, right? And that's what people are really struggle with is they're trying to learn just information. I think just the information is going to give them that like aha moment. And information can make little shifts, but it's not going to really land without that energetic component, that direct experience where you can feel it and be like, oh, this is it. Right? It goes way beyond the mind. So yeah, what was kind
Well,
of your
yeah.
next?
Well,
Was
I was
that?
just going to say, it's like, yeah, you can go to school and you can read a book and you can study a subject, but until you get out into the field and actually start putting your hands on it, a lot of that stuff is just conceptual. It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah,
Doesn't really, and that's where it's like having a person that's been in the field for 20 years and has direct experience and learned through those experiences has a much greater understanding of the inner workings of that field than someone who's been in school for the last 10 years, comes out just starting to get their hands dirty and but doesn't really understand any of it.
yeah. So what were your next steps when you went to the ceremony? And you're like, what the heck is this? Right? When you had that experience, did you seek out a guide right away?
No, it was just I wanted to talk to the person. The person actually was a part of the massage therapy school, one of the teachers. And so I was kind of waiting for my next class with her. And before that had happened, there was already a flyer up in the lobby of the massage school about the Empower Thyself class, which I didn't really understand it. Like it says this is in the earlier days of the school, the marketing and the materials were a lot more primitive than they are today. And the owner of the massage school approached me a few days before and asked me if I was going. And I told her no. And she's like, well, I think you should go. I think you'll really enjoy it. And I was like, well, I don't really have the money. And she's like, well, I'll loan you the money. You can pay me back whenever you can. Seemed like she just wasn't going to let me say no. So I just said, okay, let's do it. Like, fine, let's do it. Didn't really understand what it was. I didn't even know it was connected to the wedding. Had no idea. And she said, okay, well, before you go, you have to go get this thing called a life activation. So you need to hit up, her name was Melody, the person that officiated the wedding. She's like, you need to hit up Melody. And so I went and got a life activation like the day before Empower Thyself. And then the day of, we went out. And when we showed up at the house and I walked in the door, the energy from the wedding was there. And so as soon as I walked in the door, I was like, what is this? Did I find it? Is this going to give it to me? And so it was an immediate recognition of this energy is the same from that. So maybe this is it. And it was, at least the start of it.
That's a good way to follow your intuition, right? Because before it was like, I think this is going to be, I think this is going to be it, right? And it's like this, the connection between the wedding to the class was, oh, this feels the same. So it feels like I'm going in the right direction, right? Before you're kind of like, oh, I'll give this a try, I'll give that a try, and it crashes, right? But now you're going off your intuition rather than just whatever gets put in front of you, right?
Well, the funny thing is like, okay, well let's try this, let's try that, let's try the other. And then I come across like this and it's like, oh, this is real, but then there's like not like a strong pursuant of it. And then even here's like a map for it. Like here's a flyer about the class, and I'm like, not interested.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's the initial kind of like almost like a blind side of like almost kind of resisting it to a certain degree at first, and then once I actually made the connection, it's like, oh well, this experience is connected with this experience. Then it was like, okay, I'm in. I'm
Yeah.
100% in. But that wasn't really clear to me at first.
Yeah, for me, I had no idea. I showed up for a, what is a cord cutting, right? It was advertised as negative energy removal. And I was like, I have negative energy I can get rid of, so let's give it a shot, right? And there was some other people talking about they were going to healers, and so I did a bit of research, and my guide seemed the most like there were a bunch of different type of guides in the area. Mine seemed the most credible, and I showed up, and it was like, okay, I have no idea what this is, but it feels good, right? So I'm going to do it again and again and again until she was like, hey, you can actually learn this stuff, and I was like, really? But I had, similar to you, I was clueless of actually what it was. It just felt right, and I was seeing results. I just kept doing it. It was beyond just like, it was beyond all kind of the excuses and the mental stuff that can come up. Yeah. Um, so what type of things were you, well, yeah, I guess when you did do the class and you did get initiated, sort of, did that start filling in those gaps and did the aha moments and the light bulbs start going off, right? And the shifts starting to occur after?
Well, the thing that stood out to me is, like I says, I had the voice, the thing from the trip or whatever. And so that was like 99. And it wasn't until 2002 I got initiated. So there's some space between there. And so in that, there was a search of truth. And so there was an accumulation of things that resonated. So it's like, this feels like truth or this feels like partial truth, but I don't know exactly what's what. So I just start collecting these. I call them puzzle pieces. And after a while, certain pieces would start to fit together. And like, here's a corner. This seems to fit,
Yeah.
And so when I got to the class, not only did they seem to align with everything that I had come to believe and understand up to that point, but they understood it so much deeper than I did. It's almost like it's like you're sitting here with 1,000 puzzle pieces and you're trying to figure out where they all fit. And then someone comes up and actually like shows you the cover of what it's supposed to look like. And you're like, oh, okay. So it helps you start to organize things a little bit better to know how to start to put all the pieces together again. It kind of gives you a little bit more of a structure and a map to go off of instead of just aimlessly trying to put it all together. Does
Yeah,
that
for
make
me, I was
sense?
kind of like, I always ask why. I always wanted to figure out sort of what worked for everybody and what were the principles, right? And there were a lot of gaps in my understanding, being raised Catholic was, okay, this stuff sort of makes sense, but there's missing pieces. And as soon as I started diving into the spiritual stuff, like you said, it was putting those pieces in so you can actually connect the whole thing and say, oh, okay, this is how I can actually, it gives context to it so you can actually utilize it. Because before it's like, well, why are we praying? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? It's like, oh, well, just do it. Right. So this gives the why. This gives not only the why, but the how, right? And that was the missing piece for me. It's like, well, how can I actually utilize this? Because I feel stuck, I feel disconnected, and kind of just don't want to be here anymore because it sucks.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest piece is I think for anyone that's like searching or that comes to this is there's a certain part of where we just want to conceptualize and think that we understand things based off of ideas and teachings and whatever else. And when you come to this, you start to realize that your ability to comprehend is limited off of your experience, and you can only have experience by taking action and actually using the tools in a functional way. And when you start working with them and seeing how they function, your concepts start to get a lot more clarity about what is true and what is not. It's like you can't fully understand something until you experience it. It's like
Yeah,
I
I
think
always tell
who is
people
this?
it's like
Yeah, it's like I think Sovereign. Who is it? Sovereign says,
probably.
you. Hold on, my mind just went blank.
But yeah, what I like to tell people is like you can, people are sport fanatics, right? You can know everything about the game, but you don't really know until you're on the field, getting your ass kicked, playing the game, learning like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that, all those little adjustments, right? You can know every single stat, every bit of information, every how to, but it's not until you're actually in there doing it, then right? You get, because it's direct feedback. So we're our own scientist in life.
Oh, that's
What
what it was. He says that
what's that?
the mystery school does not teach you about a thing; it teaches you the thing.
Yeah. right? It's a
That's like my favorite pieces, and that's like what separates this from anything else that I've ever done is that we don't just teach you about a thing, we teach you the thing. Like, there's the thing, go use it.
well, you get to experience it too. It's like a hologram, right? It's like when your energy's shifting. I just wrote about this, right? When we're doing healings, we're doing initiations. It's giving you a new energy to work with, right? And when you're, it's like a video game. There's different things that occur, different challenges, different lessons, and you're learning directly, right? We were talking a little about Kabbalah and stuff before too. That's always happens during that. But and that's what accelerates your growth too, because it's not just like, okay, I'm going to read a book and now everything's the same. I'm still stuck. It's like, no, that kind of lights a fire for you to propel you forward, and you learn faster and faster. One thing I did want to ask, because I think this is really relevant for most people before they start a spiritual path, is you were talking about how you got to a point where you just didn't want to really engage in the world, and you're just kind of like, I'm out. This stuff is tough. It doesn't really matter. Money doesn't matter. Relationships don't matter. Like, I just want to stay in sort of the higher realms and just, almost like being a monk. I don't want to deal with it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you see, start off with like the church thing. You start seeing people waving the Christian banner, but yet they act another way.
Yeah.
And you start looking at like the rat race, and it's like I think most kids, especially today, kind of go through that mindset of like, this is BS. This is a waste of time. This is a game to someone else's benefit, and I don't want to be a cog in the wheel. Escape the matrix or whatever, people talk about. And so it was more of just kind of like, oh, this is a prison, this is a trap. I don't want to be a part of that. I want to find, something higher, something better. So I didn't want to engage with any of it. And so that was kind of like where my mindset was coming from. It's like, this is
It's
BS.
understandable, right? It's like, what are the fruits of, say regular life, right? Stress and all that crap that comes with it. It's like, that's not too appealing,
It's like you're
right?
young and you have nothing, so you got to work. And then by the time you work, you're old and broken down. And then you have the things, but you can't use them because now you're old. You can't go do the things. It's like, this is backwards. This whole system's
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah, it's stuck.
But uh, but like I says, a lot of that was just like I told you earlier. It's like you don't. It's easy to judge something that you don't understand. It's like when people. It's like I see in society today, people want to complain about the law, but none of them want to participate in the structure that's there.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to participate, but I hate the structure because it doesn't benefit me. Well, it doesn't benefit you because you don't work within the structure. You don't even understand how the structure is.
Right.
So it's like, it's hard to be like, oh, well, this is bad when you don't even participate enough to understand how it actually works. And then you
Yeah,
can
well,
kind
they
of
want to
take,
complain about it, but they don't want to be. You have to be in the structure to actually affect change to the structure, right? So going back to, it's understandable, right? Because life gets tough, and if we don't have clarity, if we don't have the right people guiding us and helping us, then it's very chaotic, right? But it's not until we're empowered to actually take responsibility and affect change in those systems that do need improved. Now that's when everything starts coming together, right? That's when you're like, oh, I can actually win at this game. I can actually participate. I feel good. The struggle and challenge now feels rewarding instead of just depressing, and they don't feel stuck anymore, right? And that's really a big piece, is having that's what a spiritual path does, right? It gives you the tools and the power to empower you to be a leader, to be in those situations to make it better, right? Because if you're not doing it, who's going to do it, right? And if we're just all going to live on a mountain and not have to deal with life, then we're just going to watch the world crumble and fall apart even faster.
a party in the desert. It'll change everything.
Yeah, yeah, why not? Yeah,
You know,
right. Let's just have good intentions and not have action, right? I think that's where the spiritual world can get stuck, is, we just it's a lot of, hey, let's just love and feel good, which is like, that's great, but with that love and good feelings, you have to take action, and that action is always going to be um, a lot denser. It might not feel comfortable. We might have resistance to it, right? And that's why you have to engage in both worlds, is to learn how to bring the energy in to actually serve in the physical to raise the state, right? Yeah, another thing I remember you said was when you're sort of in that feel good state, what was happening the psychedelics. You said they sort of backfired on you, right?
I can't remember the point that you're
Well,
referencing.
you were saying before the call, you're saying I was using psychedelics before because I wanted to not really engage in society and I wanted to feel those higher feelings, but I thought it was going to get me what I wanted, but then it turned and backfired on me. It wasn't giving me that, it started having a negative effect besides just the, arrest and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, essentially, I would explore these things. One on one end, I would have I don't know what other people's experience is, but I would have like visions. And in these visions, it feels like thought seemed to unlock certain mysteries of the universe. Problem was, as soon as I came down off that high, I couldn't remember what I was shown. I didn't really anchor any of it. It didn't change my life.
That's a good point.
And so from that, when I did actually start stepping on a spiritual path, I started to realize that the drugs actually made it harder for me to actually integrate the true spiritual things, like to integrate certain energies and to move past certain belief structures. So I've heard someone reference before that, a lot of people do drugs and thinks that it helps them get out of the matrix. But what it actually does is it takes them deeper and they create a sub matrix within the matrix. So now when you want to get out of the matrix, you have two levels you have to get out of.
Hmm.
And that's essentially what my experience has been. It's like I've sit here through my progression in the mystery school and on this path and the work that I do. And most things that I seem to have to like really heal beyond like my childhood stuff is just like damage in the wiring, the connections in my brain, even sometimes how I speak. Like when I first started, it's like people would literally just hear just like mumbles and jumbles of words. But in my mind, like I'm thinking and speaking clearly, and I'm being very articulate. Why can't people understand what I'm saying? And it started getting reflected back about what I actually look like. And it was actually through Kabbalah that it helped to kind of like slow down my thoughts to my words to where I can actually form a comprehensible sentence for people. And there was another initiate that was in my first Kabbalah class that also had a similar experience and kind of reflected, so we kind of like reflected that off of each other. But it does change the way that you see things. It changes the way that you think, and even changes the way that you communicate. Which is why most people only want to interact with people that also do the same drugs because they speak the same language. So it becomes like a self validation thing. It's like if you hang out with people that like to smoke weed and you don't smoke weed, they're cool with you, but they don't really invite you out that very often because you don't kind of validate their little
Yeah.
bubble that they live in, right? Even though you don't care, you're like, I'm fine with it. But the main thing is that it actually takes longer. It does damage to what people consider the soul or the etheric body. And so a lot of my time has been healing just the damage from all the drugs that I thought was enlightening me. So
Yeah, I see a
that,
lot of people now. A lot of people have been coming to me and saying, "Oh, I haven't smoked weed in 2, 3, 6 months, a year, or whatever." And those people were so hardcore about smoking weed before, but now they went through enough of it and they realize, like, hey, I feel like I'm slowing down. I feel stuck. That's the number one thing they'll say. They say, it felt harmless, but now I feel more stuck than ever. And now they're trying to reverse that. But, it's good. But these were diehard smokers that would, if you talk to them 6 months ago, they're like, oh, I'm never going to quit. Right. So it's cool to see a lot of that stuff's really coming to light where people are searching. I think there's less, just because this stuff's more accessible now, but I think there's less confusion. There's more good people to actually go to guide you to on your spiritual path. So you do see like an acceleration in that area, which is awesome to see. But yeah, people are finally waking up. Was that?
I was, sorry.
But
It's
yeah,
just,
they're just finally waking up to like, hey, drugs probably aren't the answer anymore.
right. And I think if any of those people are listening, the most important thing to understand is quitting is not enough, right? It does psychological and spiritual damage. You have to heal. And that's why you see a lot of people that keeps going back to it because they'll stop, but they still function in the same structure because they haven't actually healed that. So nothing really works out oftentimes for those people. So they wind up just kind of resorting back. And that's part of like what the 12 steps is about, is a way to heal the psychological damage and the
Yeah.
relationship damage from doing the drugs. So just quitting is not enough. You have to heal from the times that you have. And that's why I say it actually does set you back in your progression.
Well, that's a good point too. Somebody maybe 5 days ago was talking to me and he goes, "Oh, you don't drink and you don't do any drugs." I'm like, "No." And he said, I've always struggled with substances. And he's like, I would quit for maybe 3, 4, 5 months at a time. But as soon as something bad would happen, he would just say, fuck it, like, why not? Because, as we understand, it's like he's still at that same energy, right? So it's like we still have, it's like those energetic cords that are just siphoning our energy or keeping us, tethered down. And it's like, cool, okay, I'm going away. You feel better. But then as soon as something happens, it just snaps you right back down to where you were, right? It's because we have that connection to it still, and we haven't healed, and that's why healing really is important because you can start reversing the negative effects of that stuff after however long you've done it for. Yeah, exactly. There's tons of people, right? It's just sort of people don't really believe that they don't really believe they can heal, like we were saying about the experience. They don't really believe it until they actually feel it, right? That's why it's always interesting to get somebody into a healing session for the first time because it's either like, hey, I really want this, or like, hey, I think I want this, but this is beyond, what I understand in the physical world, so I don't really get it. And those people that it's always funny because I get the exact same response every time. Those people the ones that are sort of hesitant, once you do the session, I say, hey, if I would explain this all from before you started, would you have understood this? And they say the exact same thing. I say, no, I had to just experience it for myself. Now I get it, right? Because they feel different. They feel more relaxed. They feel more clear. They have better ideas. They're attracting better situations, relationships, opportunities, whatever it is. And it's like, it's the experience, right? Yeah, it's cool. So as you progressed along the path, what were some big turning points? I know Kabbalah was one, and maybe explain a little bit what Kabbalah is and sort of the structure it gives you, because it's hit or miss if people actually understand what Kabbalah is or have heard of it.
I know I was one of them. I was curious about it before I ever stepped into it, read multiple books, didn't understand any of it. I never felt like I understood Kabbalah until I did the Ascension program. But essentially, Kabbalah helps us to understand ourselves, the process of creation, and the nature of God and the universe. So some would say it's kind of like a filing system for life experiences. The main thing for me the first time that I went through it was understanding the infrastructure of how the light flowed down into my like personal experience. The biggest thing that shifted for me is this was the point that redirected me that all the powers of the upper parts of the tree and all the powers of heaven and of the universe are ultimately being funneled into the physical. The physical is the gift. The physical is the point of focus. The thing that I wanted to escape out of, that I disregarded, that I didn't really care for or like, was actually the thing I needed to be focused on the most. The teacher that taught it, she pretty much summed it up this way, and this was the slap in the face for me. It doesn't matter how much you think you understand about the upper parts of the tree, the powers of heaven and of the universe. If you cannot manifest it in the physical through action, there's nothing spiritual about you.
Oh no.
Oh man, that hurt. That alone completely 180'd changed my whole approach to life in general.
So you're saying we just can't being just a nice person is not enough, or just, you just blew the secret apart. That we can't just sit there and visualize what we want. It's just not going to just land in our lap. We have to actually take. Oh, that's
In
going to
order,
crush.
yeah, in order for anything to manifest in the physical, it requires physical action.
Yeah. And
You
there's,
know,
like you said, with the Kabbalah, right? It gives you a blue. It's not the main path, but it's a tool we learn to manifest properly, right? It has the flow of light, it gives us a structure and things to highlight and work on, so we clear out the filters in our stuff that blocks the light from coming in, so we can actually manifest, right? Yeah.
well, that's what I even liked about that, 'cause it's like reading the books about Kabbalah, and then in the Ascension program, where they actually ascend you into the spheres and you get to like experience the spheres, then you actually start to understand the sphere. And you know what my favorite one was out of all 10? Being in the physical. That ascension was the best experience that I had. The place that I had ran from and tried to escape was my most favorite experience.
Yeah, I think that's what was really relatable, right? Because it's like what we have, our growth is always going to come through what we have the most resistance to, right? So it's like if you have the most resistance to taking action in the physical because you're like, I just don't want to be here, right? And then once you empower yourself to actually do that, you're like, oh shit, this is actually amazing, right? Any of my growth has come through the same things. All those things I had the hardest resistance to, as soon as I had the support and empowerment to actually face that stuff directly head on, and I got through it, it was like, oh, this is amazing now, right? And it just builds and builds and builds, and then you have just more joy in life, right? It's like as soon as we try to hide, we only hide and run away is because we have fear and we think like we're not big enough and strong enough to do it, right? And that's why we have to seek out help and guides and people that can build us up to those levels, right?
Yeah, it's essentially having someone hold that space and container for you, because an integral part. One of the things I hear people say is like, "Oh, I'm just going to do it my way. Oh, I'm just going to do it alone." The whole structure of this was not meant to be done alone. It's all of us or none of us.
Yeah.
We're all one. We're not meant to do this alone. We're meant to serve each other, to assist each other. It is the unity and cohesion that allows the progression to actually happen. So this whole idea of I'm going to do it myself, or I'm going to go my own way, and it's like it's not the way that
It's just the
this
game
life
wasn't set up
functions.
that way, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You can't run an Amazon by yourself. Like you have
No.
to have cooperation and work with other people. Like there
Well, you
has
can
to
run it
be.
by yourself, but you'll be extremely burnt out and it just won't go that far at all, right? And it's like the higher we get spiritually, it's like the more power we have to share that power to actually have that power, right? It's not just, you don't get there by yourself. You're like, oh, life's amazing. If that was it, life would suck actually. But it's funny, but yeah, it's like as we were talking about this before about relationships, as we peel back our trauma and our junk that's keeping us separated from other people, you can actually engage. That's one of the best parts about it is we all deepen our relationships and we get a lot more, and there's a lot more love and support there. Yeah, what you're saying about that's what I said on the very last podcast I did was the my way thing, right? It's very easy to be stubborn and be like, well, everyone's kind of screwed up here, so I'm gonna do it my way, and it's like you don't think somebody else has figured it out after the thousands and thousands of years we've been here. So it's like it's way easier. That's like a speed train compared to your walking. It's like you want to get somewhere fast, figure out figure out the best way that you know and start doing that until you figure out something better, right? Yeah, exactly. That's why I say, especially here, like everything's already been done. If you want to figure out business, you want to figure out relationships, right? There are people, I'm sure every single person they've heard of somebody who has figured out what they want, right? So it's like the best piece of advice there is just go ask the person for help and just be willing to listen and try something new. And it's probably not going to agree with the way you want it to be or how you've done it, right? Because if we're stuck, it's like, if we're stuck, it's because we didn't know, we didn't have clarity. So we have to try something new that doesn't, you know, it won't necessarily, we'll have resistance. It won't necessarily agree with us at first, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing is you have to kind of be open to the possibility of being wrong. You have to be open to be like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. This person seems to be successful with what they're doing, but you can't go through understanding their process by judging and nitpicking every little detail. Oh, I like this, but I don't like this, or blah, blah. Just try the whole system. And then once you understand how the whole system works together, then you can start to make adjustments and pick apart the individual things that you may or may not like. But walking into it with this automatic like discrimination really blocks your ability to fully
That's
utilize the
another thing too. I've
tools.
seen people, they'll do another my way is like they will find a system that's great, but then they'll only do it 70% their way and they do 30% their, they try to still
Right.
put their way. And it's like, it just doesn't work like that, right? It's like, anytime I've had success is I followed the plan to a T. It has to be 100% commitment because your way, if you have your own limitations, be like, oh, it's amazing. Then you'll add your way and just wipe out all the progress you made, right?
Yeah.
You know,
It's
that's,
like it's
that's
like
why
there
it's
was.
important. What's that?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's why it's important to like the best advice I can give somebody to find somebody they want to work with is like, do they, like as we said, and it's very hermetic, right? It's like, do they have what I want? If they don't, then I won't advise following that person. But if you see qualities in that person that you actually admire, that's the person you should go ask, like, hey, I need help.
Yeah, there was a book, the was it The Path and Work of the Initiate, No, it's not that one. It's the Mystical Kabbalah. That's what it was. The Mystical Kabbalah.
Yeah.
She talks about that, to truly understand a path, you have to seek out that path in its entirety. You have to fully walk that path and accumulate the fruits from that path. And then once you do that, then you can move to another path and you can pursue that system in its entirety, not cross referencing it with what you did before, but pursuing it in its own right, following its rules and systems, obtaining the fruits of that. Then, once you have mastered both, you can kind of weave them together. But trying to just take a piece of this and a piece of that and a piece of this and a piece of that, you'll never be anything more than a dabbler.
Yeah, it's like, so I like to compare it to like searching around. Imagine being on the first level of building in the dark, searching around piece and piece, and you like bump into stuff. You're like, oh, this might be it. It's like, nah. You bump into something else. Like the lights are off, right? And that's what most people that are spinning their wheels do. It's like when this the cool thing about lineage and a spiritual path. I always say it's like going on an elevator when you're ready, and as you grow and ascend, it's like going to level two. Level it's you just ascend. You don't have to waste all your time and energy walking around trying to find a piece, not knowing how this piece goes with that piece, right? Yeah, it's cool. What about, I just mentioned hermetics. I know we're both, it's the core of the mystery school is hermetics. And what do you think? What would you say hermetics does, right? Because what we were saying before, it just gives so much clarity. It's just like, I knew that, but it's like now I can actually use it as a tool. It's very practical.
Yeah, it's like with most other things, there's nothing new under the sun. The infrastructure and the foundations are there, they're set, but they've been kind of been distorted. It's like
Pulled apart.
if you have like a marble floor, over time they kind of get stingy, so you have to clean it, you have to buff it to bring that luster back, right? And so the more that I study hermetics, it's not that it's necessarily teaching anything that hasn't been taught before, but it's bringing the luster and clarity back to why that is the way that it is and how it operates and functions with other things. um, so for me, in judging a lot of like life in the system, and thought I was awakened because I challenged all that and started to realize that actually there's a lot of legitimacy to why things are the way that they are and why they work the way that they do. And you start to see how much like hermetics has actually been used as a foundation for like the society that we built. And even the government that we run is kind of like the foundations of it was built upon hermetic principles.
It's well, you were saying something that I had the same experience when you were started asking the questions, kind of why I'm here, what's my purpose, and you said you read a book about all the religions, and that was kind of an aha moment for me. Was as I started studying other religions, I recognized I'm like we're all talking about the same thing. So it's like, what is the thing that supersedes kind of the pollution of humans and the separation? Because we're all using the same symbols, we all have these governing principles. So even since I was 5, 6 years old, I was like, there has to be sort of a rule book to life, right? Because no matter what, we're still going to be governed by universal law. So it's like, it's very smart to just, okay, let's go figure that out so we have more clarity, then we're more effective, right? So it's like every time I sit in a hermetic class and I'm like, oh yeah, like that, I had an idea of that through like experience, but this really clarifies it. It takes out the junk, right? What you said, it kind of shines it up. So it's like, oh, it's an actual thing. I can use that tool and it makes spiritual teachings extremely practical, right? It just brings them down to that the most simple level, right? Whether it's relationships, it's business, if it's health, if it's whatever it is, right?
It takes it from woo woo to duh.
Yeah, exactly, right.
It's like
Yeah, it's like then you can actually, it gives you more, how do I describe this? It makes you feel more solid in life, right? It's like when you actually know and you take action on that, it's like boom, result. You get you get results way quicker because there's a knowing and not just like it takes out a lot of guesswork, right? Especially I think for me, hermeneutics has really helped me with relationships, and that's what most people are struggling with today is relationships because one of the classes we did was the hermetic communication, understanding masculine and feminine energies. And I always like to say it's like men try to get women to think like men and vice versa. Women are trying to get men to think like women. They're upset because they're like, oh, they should understand. It's like you guys have completely different operating systems and different communications and different ways of thinking and everything, right? So it's like as soon as you really get into those, we go through the spiritual aspects of that, we go through the biological aspects of that too, right? And that gets, if you have more understanding of something outside of yourself, then you can actually connect deeper with it. So yeah, I think it's extremely, extremely helpful for relationships, and all of life is relationships too, right? That can never
Yeah, I
not
mean,
serve you.
yeah, I mean, I just recently did the Hermetic Relationships class with Sovereign Ipsissimus Dave Lanyon, and walking into it, you always expect relationships. So first mind goes to romantic, right?
Yeah.
You're like, okay, well, what about my dating life or my marriage or whatever else? Then you're like, well, it probably goes into like relationships with other people in general, like in business and whatever else. And you sit down in class, and the very first relationship they start to talk about is your relationship with yourself. Oh, man. Didn't even see that one coming.
Yeah,
But
right.
that winds up being the thing is like in most relationships, the relationships becomes rocky and tricky is because people don't really either know themselves or they don't have a good relationship with themselves. So they're looking for other people to fill the void within their own personal relationship. And so that was like one of the biggest things that just kind of like, yeah, me. What about me? What's my relationship with me?
Yeah, it's a relationship with yourself, right? And it's even the spiritual path, it's know thyself, right? So it's a relationship with yourself and a relationship with God. And the more connected you are with yourself, the more you're connected with God. The more you're connected with God, the more you can actually be in alignment, fulfill your purpose, and have deeper connections, right? So it's like, yeah, I think I was in that same class with you. And it's basically 20% romantic, 80% your relationship with everything else. Everything, right? It could be the most basic things to the most. So it was really good. But that's where, I mean, I guess on the topic of relationships still, that's where all the issues happen, right? It's like, number one, if you don't have a relationship with God, that's the number one issue, you know? So as soon as, what's up?
I was just going to say, like, the whole mission of the mystery school, and I think a lot of other groups as well, is to create world peace, to believe in world peace. Well, in order to create world peace, we have to have peaceful relations with each other. And as I tell people, Gandhi always says, you can't share what you don't have. So if you don't have inner peace, if you don't have peace with yourself, then you can't have peace in your relationships. You can't bring peace into the world. But all of it comes into relationships. This starts with me. And then how I share that same dynamic of relationship with the other people around me. And if we can really kind of like master that relationship piece, then we can actually create world peace.
Yeah, I think it's like if we don't have what you're saying, like we can't share what we don't have, right? So if we don't have peace and we're going into a romantic relationship, it's like, what are we going to be able to give that other person, right? And it's like relationships, we can heal a lot in relationships, but it ultimately comes down to our responsibility. We need to own our own shit and really take action on that if we do want to, if we're not currently in a relationship or we are in a relationship, it always comes back to the individual, right? Because it's very easy to point fingers and say, oh, it's not working because of this person, that person. And all that is just, it's reflecting your own stuff, right? Which is cool because if you're aware of that, then you have a spiritual path that can give you the tools to clean that stuff up and heal that stuff way faster. But if you're not aware of that, then you stay stuck and you're always going to be waiting around for the other person to solve your problem. It's just never ever going to happen, right? Yeah, that's why we do that class called Empower Thyself, because we give you all the power to do it yourself. You don't need, you're not dependent on anybody else. Yeah. So what, ultimately we both chose to become guides, and what was your inspiration for becoming a guide? Because it's a big responsibility, right? It's a lot further along down the path.
Yeah. So for me, it's something I've always really was drawn towards. I've always been one of those people. If I find the best cheeseburger in town, I'm telling everybody about the best cheeseburger in town. Right? Oh, you're hungry? Let me go show you where the best cheeseburger in town is. So I've always been that guy, whether it's music, movies, food, whatever else. And so spiritual tools is no different. I find something that's really good and it works, then I just want to share it. That's when we're like, hey, everybody, check this out. And so being a guy just kind of gives me the ability to help share this with people more fully and help kind of bring them into a deeper understanding of themselves and how they can start to shift their life um, in an empowered way.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a much different. Like, if you're doing it, it's hard. It's I mean, it's hard to understand unless you're actually doing it, right? If you're doing healing on somebody, or if you're initiating somebody, it's night and day difference, right? Because we can help. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm going to give this person this stuff or this thing, or I'm going to give them time and talk to them," which is still great. But it's just way different being able to serve somebody on a spiritual level because you can feel them shift. You can feel kind of the tension unwind. You can feel their joy, right? And then you can share that joy together, right? It's completely different. As we heal, it's as we heal ourselves, we're healing other people too. So it's like I feel after I do healing on somebody, I feel great as well. And then it's like, oh, then we're both in a joyful state too, right? It's funny. People come in kind of with their head down. They're very tense, and as that energy starts coming in and flowing, it's like, oh, this is nice, right? And it's just like, yeah. So as guides, we've benefited from that, and we enjoy that feeling. So it's like naturally, just we want to share that with other people. So
I mean, it's always been like going home and like having your mom be like, "Oh, well, here, let me make you some dinner," or it's just got that. Anytime I like connect with the energy, no matter what's going on
yeah,
in my life, I connect with that, and it's just kind of like this, like, oh, everything's gonna be okay.
it's sort of like when we're talking about the raves and the ecstasy and stuff. It's like that's the feeling when we're doing the drugs and stuff and whatever vices. We're trying to hijack that joy, that feeling, right? When we come crashing down. With the spiritual path, it's like you don't have that crash, right? It's the authentic version of that, right? It's sustainable. It's not a high. It's like, okay, we can,
I don't have hangovers. I don't have any of the like negative bounce
yeah,
back from it. That's why I always thought it was funny. We try to paint it as like, oh, I'm getting high and I'm exploring other, dimensions or higher states of consciousness. But then we also know that we're getting fucked up.
yeah,
Oh,
it's like,
I want to get fucked up. You know what I mean? It's like we have this terminology for it. It's like we know what we're doing on a certain level, but we kind of convince ourselves that we're having something else going on. And that's why I always say there's a cost to it. You're not just getting this experience, but you're also getting taxed on it, which is why afterwards you feel shut down, you feel
feel
drained.
worse. Yeah.
Right. So it's not actually moving you forward.
Yeah, it's like every time, I think you said it before, it's like you're trading a piece of your soul. So every time you feel great, but every time you just go lower and lower and lower and lower. And it's like at first it's like bit by bit, you can't really tell, but eventually it's like, you're going higher and it's like boom, now you're down at the, you know, 100th level in the basement. You're just like, oh, it sucks. All right.
Insidious.
Yeah, it's really sneaky. It's like yeah, it's very sneaky. It's like, yeah, you're getting all the things you wanted. It's like very kind of bait and switch. It's like, here is a really easy way to get it. And then you take the bait and it's like, then, it's, terrible. So, well, cool. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of cool stuff. And, what would you say the main, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, the main message is really you have to be in the world to change the world, right? You can't, it's very tempting to want to disassociate, to run away, to say, oh, it's too tough. I don't know what to do because we don't have clarity and we feel like we're in this chaos. But it's not really until you find the right people, you learn the right tools, you can really engage with the world. And then when you do engage with the world and create beauty and all the good things you actually wanted, it's so much better. So,
I also think it's important too. Another impactful thing for me, and this one's more recent kind of realization, is the idea of creating of heavens and the universe and life itself, is about giving form to that which is formless, right? It's about giving things structure and a place. And so, in response to like a lot of like the approaches of like the woke culture and whatever else, where they're trying to take away lines, remove boundaries, and to blur things to where it's all fluid and there is no line, there is no boundary, and you can do whatever. Is that actually pro light or is that anti light? Because it's removing structure, it's removing containers, it's removing definition of what is.
there's more
And
chaos,
right, there's
more
no
not knowing.
Right, there's no form in that. So the whole nature of the light and evolution and creation is giving form and structure. So when we start to remove form and structure, is that actually of the light?
Not at all. That's a good thing. It's like the light. You can look at it in a very practical way, right? It's like when we're in chaos and stress and fear, it's like we're in the dark, right? Bad. But when we have a flashlight and we shine light, we can actually see for once and say, okay, now with the light, I'm going to go in that direction. That's the thing I was actually looking for because I can see it, right? It brings clarity, and then we start moving forward. And then, it's I want to move there, right? So if we don't have that, we don't bring light, if we don't have structure, we're constantly going to be in chaos. Nothing's ever going to get better. Nothing's ever going to progress, right? Because we think that's another tempting too. Like, oh, I don't want structure. I don't want whatever because that means I actually have to do something. It means I have to actually build myself up and use more energy to actually move forward, right? Yeah. So,
Responsible to maintain the thing.
yeah, that responsibility with no power.
But who wants responsibility?
Some more people do now, right? Yeah, that's cool.
Well, to me, that's where the joy is. It's like when you actually like step into that responsibility and see that, yeah, I can actually do this, and you see progress and you see the fruits that can come of it. Then you're like, yeah, that's joy. Like, yeah, look what I did.
Yeah.
Oh, look at the picture I made.
Yeah, it's like winning anything. It's like even, as a kid, it's like once you win a game or a match or something, you feel great, right? It was tough. You fought the battle and you come out the other side and you win. You're like, oh, I want to do that again. And it just builds. It's like we have spiritual muscles like we do physical muscles. It's like the more we follow a plan, the more we practice and, commit to it, the better it gets. The just finding the right, find the right plans. Hopefully everybody reaches out to you and they have more questions. They want to take responsibility now.
Yeah, practice. I do healing arts in Austin, Texas. So yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of good people in Austin. I know people in Austin are definitely looking for this stuff too. If anybody's listening from Austin, feel free to reach out to Jamie. We'll tag you and yeah, yeah, no worries. Appreciate it. It was fun. Have a good one.